Thank you for coming to our event about Classroom Chatter. This event is part of the Diversity Education Week Revisited, and it's presented by the Language Diversity Ambassadors at NC State, which are myself, Shalina Omar, Marie Bissell, Zach Duke, and Allison Egger. So without further ado, Marie, you want to take it away?
I want to see if this works. It does work. Okay. So I'm going to talk about dialect diversity in educational settings. So first we're going to watch this video and think about what it's about.
Hello. Yes, can I ask a few questions about the apartment on Park Street?
What was your name?
My name is Juan Hernandez. Oh, he's gone. Hello, my name is Sanjay Kumar. I am calling about the apartment on Park Street.
It's not available.
Not available? Hello, my name is Tyrone Washington. I'm calling about the apartment on Park Street.
Hello, I am Chen Li.
My name is Khalid bin Ali. I'm Tuan Vo. Hello, my name is Moshe Goldberg. I use a wheelchair. It's gone. Not available. All right. Thank you. Yes, hello, my name is Graham Wellington. I'm calling about the apartment for rent on Park Street. Is that still available?
Yes, it is.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Really?
Okay. So what did you guys think of that video?
It's upsetting.
Yeah. There are over 2 million cases of housing discrimination per year, according to Housing and Urban Development. So basically we think about it as wrong to discriminate against people based on like sex, race, sexual orientation, things like that. But language can be a proxy for all of these things. And so linguistic discrimination can also be a big problem in classroom settings, for example. So this is a meme, it's pretty popular. So sometimes when you're judging people based on their grammar, for example, you may be using that as a proxy for other characteristics about them. So in the classroom specifically, empirical research shows that teachers think that standard English is like better and more grammatical than other dialects. And also their opinions about students are influenced by what dialect they speak, especially if it's not a standard one. In a study done by Stephanie Dunstan in 2013, she looked at how Appalachian English speakers in the classroom thought about like participation and their place in the classroom, and she found that people who spoke this dialect were less comfortable speaking up in class or participating, which created a barrier to them and made them kind of feel like they had to prove themselves in the classroom, and that eventually a lot of these students either transferred or left the school because they didn't feel like their language was being affirmed in a classroom setting. So here's a quote from one of the students. Sometimes I think that people might think that I'm not educated because of it. Just because I have this accent and you hear a country accent, you think hillbilly, and it's then hillbilly, no education. So I think it's just the social norm to think that way. And like I said earlier, it's easy for like teachers and other students to kind of buy into these like beliefs about non-standard language, especially in this case. So, as a little case study, looking at African American English in the classroom, some characteristics of African American English. Not all African Americans speak it, and you don't have to be African American to speak it. It's just that's kind of the naming convention that was favored at the time that researchers started studying it. And just like, you know, I acquired a dialect of English when I was growing up, speakers of African American English also acquired that language in a similar way in their household. And it's also not static, and speakers can have some features, but not all of them, depending on their peers and their parents. So this clip is from Talking Black in America. It's about the Ebonics controversy in schools. And it really highlights the challenges that African American English speakers face in classroom settings.
I think to the extent that we can
shine a light on the ways in which these misconceptions about language sort of perpetuate these racist ideas that continue to circulate in our society. It's important, especially when it comes to language, because a lot of times people assume that there is some linguistic basis for the stigma, and they're not aware that it really is about the people.
What does standard English accomplish that these so-called versions of substandard English don't accomplish in terms of communication? Nothing. You know what I mean? Nothing at all. Anything that seems to stand in the way, you say, oh, it'll help you get a job. Well, is that because of the language? It's not that you're unable to communicate, or is that because of all these various isms that stand in the way of you being able to take care of yourself because you live in a country that likes to do things like stand in the way of certain people being able to take care of themselves?
The issue, Mr. Chairman, has received a lot of attention all over the United States, and I simply want to say that I think Ebonics is absurd.
In the mid-90s, 1995, 1996, there was a big Ebonics controversy.
Many linguists have stated that Oakland's decision is credible, it is rational, and a potentially effective way to improve the academic standard of its students.
The Oakland School Board was trying to get what had been fairly solidly established linguistic research into schools, and the public really misunderstood the message of what was happening and reacted in ways that kind of set back what educators were trying to do with language.
That's just bad English, isn't it? How can you say that's a language?
That's different English. That's not bad.
English.
But that's your opinion that it's bad.
No, it's not my opinion.
A lot of teachers just kind of take what they've heard, sort of the predominant social narratives, and they just sort of, reproduce them.
The average citizen who encountered the term of Ebonics during the Oakland controversy did so at a time when late-night talk show hosts were, lampooning the term. And as a professional linguist, I was disheartened when I saw so many people mocking a term that referred to linguistic circumstances that I think should be better understood by the entire nation, but which have been the object of linguistic discrimination since the inception of slavery.
Okay, so this just highlights one of many dialects that appear in a classroom setting, but things like language policy and how to implement dialect-friendly curriculums in the classroom is an ongoing issue.
All right, so I will be discussing non-native English accents. And these are very variable. They range from all types of nationalities and citizens because, as we found, the modern English as we know it is spoken by more non-native English speakers than by native English speakers. Things like tomato, tomato, mater, tomato, as it was once called. So, everyone has an accent. Even animals. And the thing about these accents is some of them are stigmatized and some of them are not. Some of them are prestigious and some of them are covertly prestigious. It all really depends on who you ask. Because we all speak an accent. We all speak, depending on where we come from and the socialized features that we experienced when we grew up. So the thing is about the stigma, it comes from historical relations of power. It really does. So, for example, in the States, we have, northern dialects, like from New York, Boston. We have dialects in the South from, Alabama, Georgia. Then you go out west, you have, California accents. And these things all have different stigmas or prestige associated with them. For example, with the southern dialect, there's a lot of stigma associated with the way people from the South speak. And there's not 100%, the fact that the Civil War, the South lost, the North won. That's not the reason, but it is an influencing factor. The winner's language is normally the one that maintains the prestige in terms of conflict and warfare. But it's, when you go to other countries, you go from one end of France to the other, you're going to find a lot of dialects. You go from one end of Italy to the other, you're going to find a lot of dialects. And these dialects are all going to have their own stigma and prestige depending on who you talk to and, the opinions of the people that are speaking the dialect. So although in other countries like Italy and France, there are like institutions for standardizing the language, but even those institutions themselves are really government-based. You know, you go to someone in the countryside of Italy, they're probably going to tell you that the Italian they speak is just as good. They can communicate all the ideas they want it to communicate. Interestingly, with foreign accents, we found, you know, the majority of speakers of English are not native English speakers. If you go across the world, you'll find that it's something around 80%. So more than 2/3 of speakers of English are non-native. So we really have no grounds to be in any way offended by any kind of English accents, because English accents that are from non-native speakers are more common than English accents of native English speakers or, you know, American accents. So there was a study done in Georgia back in the 90s that looked into something called accent hallucination, which is really fascinating. And what they found with this study was, so they put two classrooms of students together. Not together, they separated, but there were two classrooms of students. And they were shown a picture of a Caucasian professor and then an Asian professor, and then the same audio was given to both students. It was audio like a lecture. And what they found was that the students who had the picture of the Chinese professor did worse and reported more problems with understanding with the same audio from the students who had the Caucasian professor. Image, the picture of the Caucasian. So it really created this like hallucination effect. When the students were looking at a picture of a Chinese professor and listening to audio, their minds kind of created this psychosomatic effect so that they perceived the audio to be different when in fact it was exactly the same. So then a couple years later, well, several years later, a couple years ago, there was a study done in British Columbia that was the exact same on the initial front. So they redid the exam, you know, they pulled students from two classrooms, two pictures, same audio, and they got the exact same results. But then they changed it up a little. They redid the experiment, except they removed the pictures. And they found that the students from both classes performed exactly the same, despite, you know, the original assumption that they would be different. And so what this kind of shows is that our perceptions can have a really important effect on what we perceive. Our perceptions can affect what we perceive, obviously. You get it. And so what it is that seeing a picture, seeing an image of a, you know, French professor or a Chinese professor or, you know, someone who's non-native to English can affect someone's hearing of an audio. But when the pictures were removed, there was no, you know, the audio was the same. So this psychosomatic effect, this hallucination that you can have, can be combated by an awareness of the fact that this person is not going to speak with an English accent that you're used to. And, you know, you got to be accepting and open to that. And it can really improve the ability you have to understand them, because a lot of the obstacles you'll face when speaking to someone with a non-native English accent are, they're in your head. They're not really there because, you know, the person can speak English, they're just going to have some different pronunciations that are going to be the main aspects of their accent. So, to build on that, they have found that repeated exposure to an accent can improve your understanding of that accent. So if you have a class with a professor from Russia, and you're going to go every day or every other day, by the end of the semester you will be able to understand that professor, you know, the non-native accent that professor has much better, if you want to. That's the thing. You have to like be aware of the possibility of misconception when someone's speaking with a non-native English accent, and then, you know, meet it head on. If this, you know, person's speaking with a Russian accent and you really enjoy the course and you want to learn more about it, you're going to be able to comprehend what this person's saying over time much better. However, if you are, you know, against it, if you stigmatize that dialect or that accent of English, then it's going to create, you know, problems in understanding. You're probably not going to do as well in class. It's been proven that if people don't appreciate or are against in some way the accent of their instructor, they will do more poorly than, you know, if you were okay with that accent and more accepting of it. So, in conclusion, campus life can be affected very much by accents. You know, in any university setting, we're going to have people from all over the world coming, and it's really important to have an open mind and be accepting of altering accents, because, you know, from both the instructor position and the student position, if a student is in a class and they have a non-native English accent and the instructor is not very accepting, constantly saying, "What? Can you say that again?" over and over, making them repeat themselves, they're not going to want to be a part of the discussions. They're not going to want to engage with the class because they feel that their accent is stigmatized. Which, and you know, vice versa. If the instructor has an accent that is not being, you know, understood very well by, you know, a couple students, and they're constantly, you know, referring to it, constantly making, you know, that accent the point of the discussion, then those students probably aren't going to do as well, and the instructor may feel, you know, that they don't need to really, you know, try as hard because people aren't going to hear them anyway. So there's just all these problematic factors that can come from non-native accents if people are not open to trying to listen and trying to understand them. So it's all about perception and awareness, really. When you get to the point of non-native English accents, the bottom line is that everyone has an accent. Even animals have accents. We found that, you know, there's accents among, like, dolphins, various breeds of dog, and like maybe cats, probably birds. You know, there's accents in all manners of communication because of the social factors primarily. And you know, what we find with accents being prevalent in all areas of society is that people, you know, a lot of times are just not aware of it, that they speak an accent, but they just don't realize it. They think the way they speak is the norm, and everyone else speaks an accent, which is just not the case. So, point being, everyone speaks an accent, and when you encounter accents that you're unfamiliar with, non-native, you know, it can create, you know, barriers that are difficult to get past, but being open to those accents and not stigmatizing them immediately is the best way to really get past those problems. You know, I mean, it comes back to that age-old saying, you know, don't judge a book by its cover. Although, I suppose in this case it would be don't judge an audiobook by its cover. Julie?
It worked. Thank you. Okay, so now we're gonna move it into the classroom and what you can do in the classroom and in your life to make people feel more comfortable. So we're talking about inclusive language, and in specific, here we're talking about gendered language. So here we have a problem, the gender binary. Male, female, boy, girl, masculine, feminine, but sometimes people don't fit into that binary. And what do we do about that? And this matters because being misgendered for students who are trans or non-binary can have a really significant psychological impact. And if they do not feel recognized for who they are, if they do not feel safe, if they do not feel that the people around them, their teachers, their peers, are seeing them as who they are, this can lead to gender dysphoria, depression, a whole slew of psychological issues that take a real toll on the students. And research has shown that LGBTQ students experience safer and more positive environments when they're being taught a positive representation of gender and sexuality within their curriculum. So we can help fight for their safety by using the pronouns that they want to be called by. Either if they are using a pronoun that they haven't been called in the past, if they used to be called he and they want to be called she, it's really important to respect that. We also have other pronouns, non-binary pronouns, they, singular they, which we will talk about. And then there are some more innovations in pronoun usage. And it's not necessary that you go and look up every single possible pronoun that someone might want to be called and then memorize them all and then ask every single person that you meet what their pronoun is. But it is important that you make your space, the space either as a teacher or a classmate, a fellow student, make that space safe for others to tell you their pronoun. either by introducing the topic yourself or talking to a teacher if you're a classmate to remind them to say something about how it's okay to correct someone on their pronoun. We also have the problem of generic key. What do you say here? Did someone just call? Yes, but someone hung up before I could answer. Do you say he or she? Yes, but he or she hung up before I could answer. Yes, but the person on the other end of the phone hung up before I could answer. Or what do you guys say?
They.
They. Yes, but they hung up before I could answer. Some people put up a stink about this because they is often used as a plural. But, oh, here we go. We can use it as a singular they. Yay, singular they. It's gender neutral. It's easy. We already have it in our day-to-day language. And we already use it all the time. Some people might think that it's still bad grammar, bad English, but it's been used since the 1400s. It's been used by esteemed writers, including Chaucer and Austen and Carroll, and it's been accepted by AP Style, Chicago Style, Washington Post, and it was the American Dialects Society Word of the Year for 2016. So I highly recommend you use this and continue to use the singular they, rather than putting it into the binary of he or she, which is awkward wording anyway. Also, when you're addressing a group, instead of making it gendered, ladies and gentlemen, or you guys could be gendered for some groups. We have everyone, y'all, especially here in the South, folks, the plural you. So we've got some great alternatives other than ladies and gentlemen or something more gendered like that. And it's really important that we think about pronouns and we think about how we use them and use ones that are inclusive, because the way we use them can reflect unconscious assumptions and stereotypes that we have that can perpetuate gender roles that limit us. Have you heard this riddle? Have you heard this riddle? Raise your hand if you have not heard it. Woohoo! Alright. A father and his son are in a car accident. The father dies instantly, and the son is taken to the nearest hospital. The doctor comes in and exclaims, "I can't operate on this boy." "Why not?" the nurse asks. "Because he's my son," the doctor responds. "How is this possible?"
Father is the doctor?
The mother is the doctor. Father dies.
Okay.
Yeah, so even though in English we don't gender nouns like we do in Spanish and many other languages, people, when I first read this, I did not get it. I was like, how can it be that father is dead? But we already make assumptions about what gender the doctor is, because it's a doctor and not, say, a nurse. Yes?
I read this when I was little, and I could not figure it out, but I was really little and already socialized, so whatever. But then recently, I told this riddle to Lauren, my girlfriend, and she could not figure it out. And she is literally, like, was waiting to hear from med schools.
Oh
So, like,
God.
a female trying to become a doctor, so socialized that when she heard this riddle, she, like, couldn't figure the riddle out, which I think is, like, a testament to how socialized we are into our language.
It's not just, you know, kids who like can't figure this riddle out. I couldn't. Women in the medical profession still see this riddle and can't figure it out.
What if he has two fathers?
Or you could have
Good
two fathers. You know,
possibility.
this is a heteronormative.
It is multiply, yeah, it can be multiply exclusive riddle.
So this matters because the use of generic he, which is what used to be really common in academia, and you can still find it in like the New Yorker and stuff like that, or even he/she, reduces the likelihood that the reader will think female for whatever the situation is. And that's really important to combat, because we want our kids and ourselves to be growing up in a world where we don't only think men when we think doctor, or a whole bunch of other things, or we don't only think female when we think nurse. Which is why that's important to also bring it into the classroom. I'm a disaster. Here are some other areas to be mindful of when it comes to inclusive language in the classroom. Ableist language, using the R word, obviously, I feel like hopefully no one uses that word in college, but definitely discourage that type of language in the classroom. Same words like psycho, OCD, bipolar, where that's can be connected to a real disorder or the mental reality for someone else. People who use it flippantly or just use it to exaggerate can be really damaging. Also, assumptions and stereotypes about sexuality, assuming that all the girls will be, like, have boyfriends or boys will have girlfriends, that kind of thing. And then racially coded or dismissive language, using terms like ghetto, thugs, tiger moms, where a specific ethnicity or race is comes up. Name pronunciation. If you have a classmate or a student in your class who has a name that you don't know, you're not familiar with, maybe it's from another culture, it's really important to make an effort to pronounce those names correctly, because that can be, not only is it disrespectful to not bother to do that, but it can be very affirming to have someone say your name correctly. And overall privilege awareness. Not everyone has had the same experiences and the same privileges, so it's really important to make examples or applications relatable to the people you're talking to. So that's it for inclusive language, and that transitions very well into Allison's part.
Okay, so hi, my name is Allison, and I wanted to talk to you today about ASL in the classroom. So previously we were talking about, inclusive language, but what if the people in your classroom are not using a spoken language, they're using a manual language? So ASL, American Sign Language, so ASL, means you use your hands. It is a manual language, not a spoken language. So specifically, I want to talk about accommodations for ASL here at North Carolina State University. I found this from the website Department of, I can't remember what it's called, Disability Service Offices, sorry. So specifically at NCSU, available for the deaf, hard of hearing population at NCSU, you go through the DSO office, and then you can request for an in-person interpreter, which means if the deaf or hard of hearing student will sit somewhere and they will have the interpreter next to them or in front of them, interpreting real time for them. You can have a VRI, which stands for Video Remote Interpreting, which is here. So kind of you have an iPad, a computer, iPhone, something like that in front of you, and you, as the deaf hard of hearing person, are looking at the screen. There's an interpreter on the screen, and they are listening to what the professor is saying, and they're interpreting it to you. So likewise, if you wanted to talk to the professor or student, you sign to the screen, and then the interpreter who's on the screen will voice it for you. The other option is ALDs or ALSs, so assistive listening devices or assistive listening systems. And that's seen in the two over there with the little boy. He has a mic, and then it can't really be seen in the picture, but he has a hearing aid. So what this is called an FM system. So attached to he has a microphone that the teacher will use. The teacher will speak into the microphone. And it connects directly to his hearing aid, so this is for more hard of hearing or deaf people who have residual hearing. So it is amplified directly into his hearing aid. Another option is a sound field system, which is in the very corner. And so that's more of just a speaker for the whole classroom, which could be beneficial for everyone in the classroom. So the speaker, again, or the professor or teacher or whoever is speaking, will wear a microphone around their neck usually. And then their voice is amplified through the sound field system. So everyone can benefit from increased audio. The other option for a deaf hard of hearing population at NCSU is captioning. You can request that all videos that might be shown in the classroom, they can be captioned. The other thing, class notes or staff note taker. So class notes means that the professor ahead of time will give you the class notes about what the professor might be talking about today. Kind of like a handout that you could look at beforehand. The other option is you can have a staff note taker, which means that wherever you are sitting, next to you will sit the staff note taker, and they will usually on a computer, and they will type out word for word everything that is being said in the classroom by the professor or by students. And furthermore, if you wanted to talk, then you would type out on the computer that the staff note taker has, you type out what you want to say, and then that staff note taker can voice it for the rest of the class. But with everything that I just told you about, there's a lot of problems. So with an in-person interpreter, if you're looking at the interpreter to know what is being signed, you're not looking at what's on the board, you're not looking at the professor, your attention is directed at this one person, and you can miss a lot just from looking at the interpreter. So with VRI, the video remote interpreter, what if you don't have Wi-Fi? What if the professor wants you to go outside? Without Wi-Fi, or if Wi-Fi crashes, that can be, if that's your only means of interpreting, that can be a really big issue. Similar with the assistive listening system or devices, if they run out of power, if they don't work, and you don't have a backup, that can be very detrimental to your education. Same with captioning. So I'm sure that you guys have seen videos, either on YouTube or on TV, or videos where the captions just don't match what's actually being said. Or the captions are slow, or they're too fast, or they just... Also, with that, if you're reading the captions, you're not looking at the video, which has its own problems. Same with class notes and staff note taker. Reading class notes, not the same as being able to get the full information from a professor. Same with staff note taker. Just, even if there's only one person speaking, having someone write out word for word everything that's been happening, whether a student in the background asks a question, whether there's multiple people talking at once, it's very difficult to type notes word for word like that for somebody. So there can be issues with that. Same with note taking. If you have an interpreter, or if you have, just taking notes in general is hard when your main communication is visual. So more with student life, this kind of goes back to an in-person interpreter. What if you wanted to meet with your professor outside of class for office hours? Then you have to schedule an interpreter. You have to make sure the interpreter is available for your time. Or what if your class changes? Then the professor says, I need to do this outside. I need you to meet here. And then the interpreter is not available. Or even if you just wanted to go to a social event, you have to schedule an interpreter to go with you, and that can just be awkward. Sometimes, A, finding an interpreter available, or B, not being able to talk directly to people, having to go through an interpreter. For the classroom acoustics, this is more about kind of the sound field systems and the FM systems. It's just based on, especially older classrooms that have wood floors or concrete, it's just harder for the acoustics. Lighting goes back to the interpreter. So if, again, let's say that you have an in-person interpreter and you want to watch a video in the class, usually you turn the lights off. But then it makes it harder to see the interpreter. So language deficiencies, lip reading, so it can be difficult, even with an interpreter, whether an in-person interpreter or VRI, because there are very differing levels of ASL, which has to go back to only 10% of deaf people have deaf parents. So that means that 90% of deaf people are not born into a home that knows ASL. Usually they learn it when they go to school, which means deaf people have a lot of different levels of ASL. So it can be hard to find the right interpreter. It's not one interpreter fits all. You have to find a match that works with you, kind of situation. And so this is just a little bit more about the deaf hard of hearing at NCSU. So little d, deaf, means that you can't hear. Big D, deaf, stands for you have associated yourself with the deaf culture. HH, hard of hearing. So according to the Disability Services Office demographics, which is on the website there, only 40 students attend NCSU identify as deaf or hard of hearing. That is a super duper low number for the amount of students who go here, who identify as hearing. One thing that I did find out is the biotechnology program, BIT. They were partnering with the North Carolina School of the Deaf and teaching them a lot of science and using the facilities here to generate interest within the deaf school, and, which I thought was really cool. And then another option, which is like, I guess, a plug over the club here. NCSU LDA Club, you can come check us out and learn more. So why is this important to you as a hearing person? So if you're going to have an event here or wherever, have you hired interpreters? Because you can't just, you have to plan out in advance, obviously. Furthermore, have you advertised the event as being interpreted, which is usually this sign here. This means, so this is interpret in sign language. And so it's usually in the lower corner right there of any advertisement that you'll have. Also, is the event visually accessible? So is there seating appropriate for the interpreter? Is the lighting available for the interpreter? So you can see it. Furthermore, so backdrops too. If you have a crazy like neon polka dotted backdrop, that can be hard to visually keep your eyes on the interpreter and not be distracted by the crazy background you've got going on. And also, are you familiar with ASL interpreting? So if you only have one interpreter, which is really not recommended because your hands can get tired interpreting for a long time. If you have, let's say your event has a panel of 5 different speakers, one interpreter cannot sign all 5 people at once, especially if there's overlap. And so handouts too, it is helpful to have just an outline of what's going on. If you did want more information, there's links over there that I put up for the National Association of the Deaf, North Carolina Beginnings, which is a good program that partners with infants who have been diagnosed with some sort of hearing loss, Department of Social Services or Health and Human Sources, the NCSU Disability Services Office Deaf NC events. So a great way to do that, to get involved in the deaf community, is to just go to events and meet them, because they're awesome. So again, triangle, events within the triangle, or just like Facebook. There's really cool Facebook pages if you're nervous to go to any deaf events. You could just like a Facebook page and just look at them online. So, if there are any questions or comments or concerns about anything.